It lasted 8 minutes. 8 minutes that shattered the most powerful blackmail network in modern history. Benjamin Netanyahu had just finished his desperate plea to FBI Director Kash Patel. Keep the Epstein Files buried, protect mutual interests, maintain strategic partnerships. He was expecting the usual compliance from American officials. But then Patel opened a classified folder and said something that made the Israeli Prime Minister's blood run cold. Mr. Prime Minister, your name appears on 47 different documents in Jeffrey Epstein's files. Would you like to explain why? FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C. January 15, 2026. The meeting wasn't scheduled to happen. Netanyahu had flown to Washington under the guise of routine diplomatic consultations, but everyone knew the real reason. For months, pressure had been building for the FBI to release the complete, unredacted Jeffrey Epstein files, thousands of documents that could expose the most powerful people in the world. And Netanyahu was terrified of what those files might reveal. But here's what nobody knew yet. Kash Patel had been planning this confrontation for weeks. Deep inside the FBI's most secure vault, agents had been meticulously analyzing every page of the Epstein files, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. What they discovered wasn't just a sex trafficking ring. It was the most sophisticated blackmail operation in history, with tentacles reaching into every corner of American government, business, and media. And at the center of it all was a foreign intelligence operation that made the FBI director's blood boil. The meeting began cordially enough. Netanyahu, accompanied by his intelligence chief and his American lawyer, sat across from Patel in the FBI director's secure conference room. The Israeli Prime Minister deployed his legendary charm, speaking about shared values, common enemies, and the importance of protecting sensitive information that could damage innocent people. Director Patel, Netanyahu began with his characteristic smile. I understand you're under pressure to release these Epstein documents. But surely you recognize that some information is too sensitive for public consumption. Some revelations could damage people who were merely peripheral to this tragedy. Patel listened without expression. He had heard similar appeals from other world leaders, politicians, and business titans, all desperate to keep their names out of the Epstein files. But Netanyahu's presence was different. The Israeli Prime Minister wasn't just asking for discretion, he was demanding it with the confidence of someone who expected automatic compliance. Furthermore, Netanyahu continued, these documents could compromise ongoing intelligence operations. They could damage relationships between allies. They could provide propaganda material for our enemies. Surely the FBI's responsibility is to protect American national security, not to sensationalize old scandals. It was a masterful performance, the kind of presentation that had convinced American officials for decades. Netanyahu was positioning the suppression of evidence as patriotic duty, framing the protection of the guilty as national security. But he had made one critical miscalculation. Kash Patel wasn't like previous FBI directors. Mr. Prime Minister, Patel replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in the room tense. You raise interesting points about national security and protecting innocent people. So let me ask you directly, which category do you fall into? Netanyahu's smile flickered for just a moment. I'm not sure I understand your question, Director. Patel opened the classified folder that would change everything. Inside were photocopies of documents, photographs, and flight logs that the FBI had been analyzing for months. Each page told part of a story that Netanyahu had spent years trying to keep buried. Jeffrey Epstein's private flight logs show you took 17 trips on his aircraft between 2008 and 2018. Patel said, sliding the first document across the table. His personal calendar includes 23 meetings with you, including several at his Manhattan mansion and his island property. His phone records show 127 calls between your personal number and his private line. The room was dead silent. Netanyahu's intelligence chief tried to maintain his poker face, but his hand moved instinctively toward his secure phone. The American lawyer started taking notes, already calculating legal strategies and damage control scenarios. But Patel wasn't finished. He pulled out another set of documents that made Netanyahu's confident demeanor crumble entirely. More interesting are these financial records, Patel continued. Between 2010 and 2019, Jeffrey Epstein transferred $47 million to accounts controlled by organizations linked to you and your political campaigns. The transfers were structured to avoid detection, routed through multiple shell companies, and timed to coincide with crucial political moments in Israel. Netanyahu tried to interrupt, but Patel held up his hand. "I'm not done, Mr. Prime Minister, because the financial records are just the beginning of what we've discovered." The FBI director pulled out a series of photographs that would later be described as the most damaging evidence in the entire Epstein investigation. They showed Netanyahu at Epstein's Manhattan mansion, at private parties on his island, and in intimate conversations with other high-profile figures who had been implicated in the trafficking network. These photographs were found in Epstein's personal safe, Patel explained. They were labeled in his handwriting with dates, locations, and what he called insurance information. It appears Mr. Epstein was very careful to document his relationships with powerful people. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. Patel opened a final folder and pulled out documents that would expose the true scope of the Epstein operation and Netanyahu's central role in it. "What we've discovered, Mr. Prime Minister, is that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just running a sex trafficking operation. He was running an intelligence operation, and according to these documents, he was working for Israeli intelligence." The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Netanyahu's lawyer immediately started objecting, claiming diplomatic immunity and threatening international incidents. But Patel continued methodically laying out the evidence that would destroy Netanyahu's careful denials. Epstein's encrypted communications, which our cyber teams finally cracked last month, show detailed discussions about collection operations and asset development. He refers repeatedly to the operation and Tel Aviv oversight. He discusses specific American officials who had been compromised and were now controllable assets. Patel pulled out transcripts of conversations that read like intelligence briefings rather than social chatter. Epstein discussed American politicians' vulnerabilities, business leaders' weaknesses, and media figures' secrets, all in the context of how they could be leveraged for Israeli interests. But the most interesting communications, Patel said, looking directly at Netanyahu, are between Epstein and someone identified only as the chairman. Based on communication patterns, timing, and references to Israeli political events, our analysts have concluded that the chairman was you. Netanyahu's face went pale. For decades, he had built his reputation on intelligence and strategic thinking. Now he was watching an American FBI director systematically dismantle the most sophisticated blackmail operation in history. An operation that had made Netanyahu one of the most powerful people in the world. The communications were devastating. The chairman discussed which American officials should be targeted for compromise. He provided intelligence about their personal lives, their travel schedules, and their vulnerabilities. He suggested specific approaches for each target, and received detailed reports about successful operations. In one particularly revealing exchange, Patel continued, Epstein reports to the chairman about compromising a senior American senator. The response from the chairman is excellent. This gives us leverage on the Defense Appropriations Committee. Increase his invitation frequency and document everything. The implications were staggering. For years, American foreign policy had been influenced by a network of compromised officials who were being blackmailed by a foreign intelligence operation. The special relationship between America and Israel hadn't been based on shared values or common interests. It had been based on systematic blackmail and coercion. But Netanyahu wasn't going down without a fight. Drawing on decades of political experience, he attempted to reframe the conversation and minimize the damage. Director Patel, he said, trying to regain his composure, even if these allegations were true, which I categorically deny, you must understand the complexity of intelligence relationship. Sometimes methods that appear unsavory are necessary to protect mutual interests and combat common enemies. It was the wrong thing to say. By not denying the allegations outright, Netanyahu had essentially confirmed that, and by justifying the operation as necessary for mutual interests, he had revealed his complete misunderstanding of American law and values. Patel's response was swift and devastating. Mr. Prime Minister, there are no mutual interests that justify operating a blackmail network against American officials. There are no common enemies that excuse compromising American democracy. What you're describing isn't intelligence cooperation, it's a hostile foreign operation against the United States. The FBI director stood up, towering over the Israeli delegation. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't your asset, Mr. Prime Minister. You were his handler, and this operation wasn't about protecting Israel. It was about controlling America. Netanyahu tried one final desperate gambit. Director Patel, surely you understand that releasing this information would damage the relationship between our countries. It would provide propaganda to our enemies. It would undermine American interests in the Middle East. But Patel had anticipated this argument. Mr. Prime Minister, do you know what really undermines American interests? Having our foreign policy controlled by foreign blackmail operations. Do you know what really damages our country? Having our elected officials compromised by foreign intelligence services. The FBI director walked to the window overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue. For years, American officials have made decisions based on what they thought was best for our ally Israel. Now we discover that many of those decisions were made because those officials were being blackmailed. That's not alliance, Mr. Prime Minister. That's subordination. Netanyahu made one last attempt to salvage the situation. What would it take, he asked quietly, to keep this information classified? What would Israel need to do to maintain our strategic partnership? It was the final confirmation that Patel needed. Netanyahu wasn't denying the allegations anymore. He was trying to negotiate the terms of their suppression. It was an admission of guilt wrapped in diplomatic language. Mr. Prime Minister, Patel replied, the FBI doesn't negotiate with foreign intelligence operations. We expose them, we dismantle them, and we prosecute those responsible. The meeting was over. Netanyahu and his delegation left FBI headquarters knowing that their worst nightmare was about to become reality. The Epstein Files would be released. The blackmail network would be exposed, and decades of Israeli influence operations would be laid bare for the world to see. But Netanyahu had one final card to play. Within hours of leaving the FBI, he activated every asset, every contact, and every favored official in the American government. Phone calls were made to senators, congressmen, and business leaders. Pressure was applied through back channels, unofficial communications, and third-party intermediaries. The message was consistent: stop Kash Patel before he destroys the US-Israel relationship. The campaign was swift and coordinated. Within 24 hours, major American newspapers were running editorials questioning the wisdom of releasing sensitive intelligence documents. Television pundits debated whether transparency was worth damaging America's most important Middle Eastern alliance. Former government officials appeared on news programs warning about the dangers of compromising ongoing intelligence operations. But this time, the pressure campaign backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating Patel, it provided him with additional evidence of the blackmail network's reach and effectiveness. Every person who applied pressure, every media outlet that published sympathetic coverage, every official who warned against transparency, they all became part of the FBI's expanding investigation into foreign influence operations. They're not defending American interests, Patel told his senior staff during a classified briefing. They're defending their own complicity. Every person who tries to suppress these files is telling us exactly how deep this operation goes. The FBI director made a decision that would change American politics forever. Instead of releasing the Epstein Files piecemeal or in heavily redacted form, he would release everything at once, complete, unredacted, and with full context about the intelligence operation behind it. On February 1, 2026, at exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time, the FBI uploaded the complete Jeffrey Epstein files to a public website. Over 12,000 pages of documents, photographs, communications, and analysis were made available to anyone with an internet connection. The release was accompanied by a detailed FBI report titled Operation Honey Trap, the systematic compromise of American officials by foreign intelligence. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Within hours, the names of dozens of American politicians, business leaders, and media figures were trending on social media. Photographs emerged showing powerful people in compromising situations. Communications revealed the systematic targeting and blackmail of American officials by foreign operatives. But the most shocking revelation was the scope of Israeli intelligence penetration into American institutions. The files showed that Mossad had been running systematic operations against American targets for decades, using Epstein's network to compromise and control officials at every level of government. The political fallout was unprecedented. 3 senators announced their resignations within the first week. A Supreme Court justice faced impeachment proceedings. Major business leaders stepped down from their positions. The Speaker of the House called for a complete investigation of foreign influence in Congress. But the most significant consequence was the complete transformation of American-Israeli relations. For the first time in decades, American officials began questioning whether Israel was really an ally, or just a sophisticated adversary. The special relationship that had dominated American Middle East policy for generations came under fundamental scrutiny. International reaction was equally dramatic. European allies who had long suspected Israeli operations in their own countries began their own investigations into Epstein-linked activities. Intelligence services worldwide started reviewing their relationships with Israeli counterparts. The global intelligence community began treating Israel as a potential threat rather than a trusted partner. Netanyahu's government fell within 6 months, brought down by the scandal of the exposed blackmail network. Israeli voters were furious that their leaders had risked their country's security and reputation for what appeared to be personal power and control. The operation that was supposed to strengthen Israel's position had ultimately weakened it catastrophically. But perhaps the most important long-term consequence was the restoration of American independence in foreign policy. For years, American decisions had been influenced by officials who were secretly compromised by foreign powers. The exposure of the Epstein network allowed America to make policy based on its own interests rather than foreign blackmail. New legislation was passed requiring extensive background checks for officials with access to classified information. Congressional ethics rules were strengthened to prevent foreign influence. Intelligence sharing agreements were revised to prevent foreign operatives from accessing American systems. The FBI's counterintelligence budget was dramatically increased as Congress recognized the ongoing threat from foreign influence operations. Kash Patel became a national hero, praised for his courage in exposing corruption at the highest levels of government. His approval ratings soared to levels rarely seen for FBI directors. But perhaps the most satisfying moment for Patel came 6 months after the file's release, when intercepted communications revealed Netanyahu complaining to his advisors, "How did I misjudge this so badly? Patel was supposed to be controllable like the others. How did one FBI director destroy 30 years of operation?" The answer was simple but devastating. Netanyahu had made the same mistake as every other foreign operative. He had assumed that American officials were ultimately controllable, that pressure and influence could overcome institutional integrity. He had never encountered an American leader who truly believed in American independence. Today, when intelligence professionals study successful counterintelligence operations, the Epstein Files release is taught as a masterclass in how to dismantle foreign influence network. The systematic exposure of the blackmail operation not only eliminated specific threats, but sent a clear message to other foreign powers. American institutions can't be bought, blackmailed, or controlled. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal, which had originally been seen as a story about individual corruption, was revealed to be something far more sinister, a foreign intelligence operation that had compromised American sovereignty for decades. And it took one FBI director with the courage to follow the evidence wherever it led to expose the truth and restore American independence. Netanyahu's attempt to suppress the Epstein Files had backfired completely. Instead of protecting his blackmail network, he had exposed it. Instead of maintaining control over American officials, he had lost all influence. Instead of strengthening Israel's position, he had fundamentally damaged it. The 8-minute meeting that was supposed to bury the truth forever had instead guaranteed that the truth would be exposed to the world. And America learned an important lesson. Sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is refuse to be controlled by foreign powers, no matter how friendly they claim to be. Kash Patel had chosen transparency over diplomatic convenience, truth over political pressure, and American independence over foreign influence. The decision cost him nothing and gained America everything: its sovereignty, its integrity, and its freedom from foreign blackmail networks that had operated in darkness for far too long. In the end, the most sophisticated blackmail operation in history was undone, not by military action or diplomatic negotiations, but by one FBI director who understood that American law enforcement serves American interests, not foreign power. The files that were meant to remain buried forever became the key to America's liberation from decades of foreign control. And Netanyahu learned that in America, unlike in many other countries, there are still officials who can't be bought, threatened, or controlled by foreign operatives. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy to corruption is simple institutional integrity, properly applied by leaders who remember their oath to serve their own country first. The Epstein Files didn't just expose individual crimes, they exposed a systematic attack on American sovereignty that had been disguised as friendship. And thanks to one FBI director's courage, America finally fought back and won. But the story didn't end with the files' release. The aftermath brought revelations that were even more shocking than the original documents. As FBI analysts continued processing the massive trove of evidence, they discovered that the Epstein operation was just one node in a much larger network of foreign influence operations. Additional documents revealed systematic efforts to compromise American academics, journalists, and think tank researchers. Universities that had received Israeli funding were found to have suppressed research critical of Israeli policy. Media outlets with Israeli connections had systematically biased their coverage of Middle Eastern events. Think tanks had produced policy recommendations that served Israeli interests rather than American ones. The revelation transformed American academic and media landscapes. Universities began reviewing their foreign funding sources and implementing new transparency requirements. News organizations started disclosing their international connections and potential conflicts of interest. Think tanks faced new scrutiny about their funding sources and policy recommendations. Perhaps most importantly, the American public began understanding how foreign influence operations actually work. The Epstein scandal had pulled back the curtain on sophisticated methods of control that went far beyond simple bribery or corruption. Americans learned about compromat, honey traps, and the systematic cultivation of assets over decades. This education had profound political consequences. Voters began demanding that their representatives prove their independence from foreign influence. Political candidates faced new scrutiny about their international connections and funding sources. The era of automatic support for foreign allies based on historical relationships was coming to an end. The intelligence community also underwent fundamental changes. The FBI's counterintelligence division was expanded dramatically, with new units specifically focused on identifying and dismantling foreign influence networks. Training programs were developed to help American officials recognize and resist foreign manipulation attempts. International cooperation on counterintelligence increased as other countries dealt with their own foreign influence problems. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance began sharing information about foreign operations more systematically. European allies implemented their own versions of the reforms that had proven successful in America. But perhaps the most significant long-term change was psychological. For generations, American officials had been conditioned to defer to certain foreign allies, to treat their interests as equivalent to American interests, to assume that criticism of their policies was somehow unpatriotic. The Epstein revelations shattered those assumptions permanently. A new generation of American leaders emerged who understood that true friendship between nations requires honesty, not deference. They recognized that helping allies meant telling them when they were wrong, not covering up their mistakes. They learned that American independence was a prerequisite for any healthy international relationship. The transformation was visible in congressional hearings, diplomatic negotiations, and international forums. American representatives began speaking with a confidence and independence that hadn't been seen in decades. They pushed back against foreign pressure, questioned traditional assumptions, and prioritized American interests without apology. This new assertiveness had global implications. Other countries that had grown accustomed to manipulating American policy through influence operations found themselves dealing with officials who couldn't be bought, threatened, or controlled. The entire international system had to adjust to the reality of a truly independent America. The economic consequences were equally significant. American businesses that had been influenced by foreign operations began making decisions based purely on commercial considerations rather than political pressure. Trade relationships became more balanced as American negotiators stopped giving automatic advantages to certain countries. Military and security cooperation also evolved. Intelligence sharing agreements were revised to ensure genuine reciprocity rather than one-sided arrangements. Defense partnerships were restructured to serve mutual interests rather than just allied preferences. America's military presence abroad was reconsidered through the lens of American interests rather than foreign demand. 2 years after the Epstein Files release, comprehensive studies showed that American foreign policy had become more coherent, more consistent, and more effective. Without the distorting influence of foreign blackmail operations, American decisions could be based on careful analysis rather than hidden coercion. The personal cost to those exposed in the files was severe but appropriate. American officials who had been compromised faced legal consequences, ranging from prosecution to permanent disqualification from government service. Business leaders lost their positions and reputations. Media figures saw their credibility destroyed. But there was also an unexpected element of relief among some of those exposed. Officials who had been living under blackmail for years finally spoke publicly about the psychological toll of foreign control. Their testimonies revealed the human cost of these operations and helped other potential targets recognize and resist similar pressures. The international intelligence community underwent its own reckoning. Israel's intelligence services faced unprecedented scrutiny and criticism from allies who had trusted them. Other countries with similar operations began scaling back their activities, recognizing that the risks now outweighed any potential benefit. Netanyahu's political career never recovered from the scandal. Even after his government fell, he faced ongoing legal challenges related to his role in the operation. More importantly, his reputation as a strategic mastermind was permanently destroyed. History would remember him not as a clever leader, but as someone who catastrophically overreached and lost everything. The Mossad, once considered one of the world's most effective intelligence services, faced years of rebuilding its reputation and relationships. The systematic exposure of its operations had damaged its effectiveness and credibility worldwide. It would take decades to recover from the strategic failure of the Epstein operation. But perhaps the most important legacy of the scandal was educational. The American public learned how modern influence operations actually work, making them more resistant to future attempts at manipulation. Citizens became more skeptical of media narratives, more demanding of transparency from officials, and more protective of their country's independence. Schools began teaching about foreign influence operations as part of civics education. Universities developed programs to study and counter foreign interference. The private sector created new industries focused on identifying and preventing foreign manipulation. The technological implications were equally significant. Social media platforms, exposed as vectors for foreign influence, implemented new systems to identify and counter manipulation campaigns. Internet companies developed better tools for detecting inauthentic behavior and foreign propaganda. Government agencies created new capabilities for monitoring and responding to foreign influence operations. The FBI's technical capabilities were expanded to include sophisticated analysis of digital communications, social media manipulation, and financial networks used by foreign operatives. 3 years after the files' release, international surveys showed that America's reputation for independence and integrity had been significantly restored. Other countries began viewing America as a more reliable partner precisely because they knew American positions were based on genuine national interests rather than hidden coercion. The Patel Doctrine became a model for other countries dealing with foreign influence problems. The principle of complete transparency about foreign operations, regardless of diplomatic consequences, was adopted by allies who had their own foreign influence challenges. But perhaps the most satisfying development for Patel personally was the transformation in how foreign leaders approached America. The era of expecting automatic deference, of assuming American officials could be pressured or controlled, was over. Foreign leaders had to engage with America as an equal, not as a subordinate to be manipulated. In his final interview as FBI Director, Patel reflected on the decision to release the Epstein Files. The easiest thing would have been to keep those documents classified forever. Nobody would have been embarrassed, no relationships would have been damaged, no one would have faced consequences, but America would have remained under foreign control. He continued, "Sometimes protecting short-term relationships means sacrificing long-term independence. I chose independence. I chose truth. I chose America. And I'd make the same choice again." The interviewer asked about the personal cost of his decision, the diplomatic pressure, the media criticism, the threats from powerful interests. Patel's response became one of the most quoted statements of his tenure. "The only thing worse than being attacked for doing the right thing is being praised for doing the wrong thing. I'd rather be hated for freeing America than loved for keeping it enslaved." Today, the Epstein Files release is studied as a case study in how institutional courage can overcome foreign influence operations. Intelligence agencies worldwide use it as a training example. Law schools teach it as a masterclass in choosing law over politics. Business schools analyze it as a demonstration of principled leadership under pressure. But perhaps the most important lesson is simpler. Sometimes the most patriotic thing an American official can do is refuse to be controlled by foreign powers, regardless of the personal or political cost. The short-term pain of exposure is always preferable to the long-term damage of hidden control. The 8-minute meeting between Kash Patel and Benjamin Netanyahu had changed everything. What was supposed to be a routine diplomatic conversation became the moment when America chose independence over subordination, truth over convenience, and transparency over corruption. Netanyahu had come to Washington expecting compliance and left having triggered the complete exposure of his life's work. The blackmail network that was supposed to remain hidden forever was laid bare for the world to see. And America learned that it could be truly free only when it refused to be controlled by anyone, including those who claimed to be friends. The Epstein Files didn't just expose individual crimes, they liberated an entire country from decades of hidden foreign control. And that liberation began with one FBI director, who understood that American law enforcement serves America, not foreign powers who expect automatic